I never expected her to remember my name, let alone the coffee I always ordered. It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, and the corner cafe smelled like burnt sugar and wet newspaper. I was alone at the small round table by the window, my laptop open but untouched, the cursor blinking like it was mocking me. She appeared behind the counter without a sound, her hair pulled back in a loose knot, a few gray strands catching the soft yellow light. "Hey, Carter," she said. Not loud, not cheerful, just precise. Like she'd paused a moment, remembered, and then, without asking, she set a cup in front of me. "Black, no sugar. Thought you want this before it gets cold." I looked down, fumbling with my fingers around the handle. "Thanks," I said. My voice was quieter than I meant it to be. Her eyes flicked to my laptop screen for a moment, then back to her hands, folding a napkin. The movement was casual, but something about it felt deliberate, like she existed entirely in this small space, and yet, somehow, I couldn't stop noticing. I watched her move around the cafe, adjusting cups, wiping the counter, and I realized I'd been here 3 times that week. Not because I loved the coffee, though I did, but because she was always there. Because she remembered. We fell into that strange rhythm, the quiet acknowledgement of each other. I'd half joke about how I couldn't survive the week without caffeine, and she'd tilt her head like she might laugh, but didn't. One night, she added a dash of cinnamon on top of my black coffee, just to see if I'd notice. I did. I stirred it slowly, just to make the moment last. It wasn't just that she was attractive, though she was the sort of beauty that didn't demand attention but collected it quietly, in the way a well-loved book holds its creases. It was the small things. The way her eyebrows lifted slightly when she was curious. The way she remembered my cousin's name when I'd mentioned him once in passing. The way she always left a margin of space between us when she walked past, but not too much. I was 23. She was 45. My friend's mom. A fact I kept tucked away because it complicated nothing and everything at the same time. I told myself it was admiration, pure and innocent, but my chest tightened when our hands brushed briefly while she handed me a sugar packet. My life was a collection of small absences. Unsent texts to old friends, paused thoughts that I'd never finish aloud, the leftover loneliness in the apartment that smelled faintly of detergent and regret. And yet here at this table, it felt like someone had noticed, had quietly placed a piece of warmth where it was always missing. She glanced at the clock. "Late again, huh?" Her lips quirked. The corner of her mouth hinted at something I couldn't name, a history I couldn't read. I nodded. "Yeah." Words failed me, as usual. She started wiping a table nearby, fingers brushing the edge of a coaster. I wanted to ask if she'd be here tomorrow, or tonight, but I didn't. Then, as I was standing to leave, my phone buzzed on the table. A text. I picked it up. My thumb hovered. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. "Don't stay at the cafe too late. Come upstairs when it's quiet." I blinked, stared at the words. My heartbeat filled the sudden space between my thoughts and the door. I left my coffee half finished, and for the first time in months, the apartment didn't feel empty. The next evening, I found myself back at her apartment building. I didn't text. I didn't plan. I just walked, letting the quiet hum of the hallway fill the space between my thoughts. She opened the door before I could knock. The dim hallway light caught her profile. She looked exactly the same and somehow impossibly different. "Carter," she said, voice soft, like she'd been expecting me all along. "Come in." "There." I nodded, stepping inside. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something warmer, maybe cinnamon from the cookies she baked for her son. The kettle whistled. I noticed her hands, the same hands that moved over counters and coffee cups, now carefully balancing a mug. We sat on opposite sides of the small table. The steam from our mugs curled between us, thin and slow, like the pauses in our conversation. "You ever," she started, her voice catching for a fraction of a second, "listen to a song you shouldn't like, but stays with you anyway?" I hesitated. Sometimes. My fingers traced the rim of the mug, pretending I wasn't listening too closely. She smiled small, almost shy. When my ex left, I kept listening to one song over and over. Made me feel like maybe someone else could understand, even if it was just the melody. I swallowed, aware of the pulse in my throat. "I know the feeling," I said. And I did, but not in the same way. My own lonely nights were quieter, mostly spent staring at phone screens I didn't want to answer. Her eyes flicked to mine. A moment. Something unspoken passed between us. There was risk here. Too much risk. My friend's mom. A woman whose life was mostly off limits, whose trust one shouldn't test. I imagined telling someone, and the shame cut like a paper knife. But then, I imagined her smile lingering across my ceiling at night, and the risk became a strange, aching pull. I leaned over to help her with the teapot, accidentally brushing her fingers. She flinched, then relaxed, a tiny shiver passing between us. The kettle hissed, and for a second I imagined that hiss as a heartbeat. We talked a little more, inconsequential things, the news, a minor argument about whether the old oak in her courtyard needed pruning. But every word carried weight. Every glance was measured. Every pause was a dialogue of its own. At one point, she looked up from stirring her tea, eyes half-shadowed, and said, "You don't talk much about yourself, do you?" I shrugged, uneasy. Guess I'm not used to someone actually listening. Her gaze softened. "Well, I'm listening." We sat in that quiet, the ticking clock filling the spaces where our words didn't reach. I imagined leaving, imagined staying. Imagine her hand in mine, or maybe just the light brushing across her cheek. Then she laughed softly at something I'd said, nothing particularly funny, and reached out, briefly, her fingers grazing mine. Not enough to cross lines, but enough to mark them. I didn't pull away. I didn't need to. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I stopped by the cafe later that week, the afternoon sunlight bleeding through the blinds in thin stripes. She wasn't behind the counter. Not there, not anywhere. I let the bell above the door ring a little too long, pretending I was scanning shelves instead of hoping she'd appear. When she finally walked in, carrying a stack of papers from the office across the street, she looked distant, a little tight around the shoulders. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," I said, voice low, careful. "Hey," she replied, setting the papers down. Her fingers lingered on the edge of the counter longer than necessary. Something shifted, just a whisper. I felt in my chest. The pull between us, that quiet rhythm we'd begun, was suddenly lopsided. She kept glancing at the door as if she expected someone else. We sat at our usual table. I poured coffee for both of us, the liquid trembling slightly in a mug. She took it, not looking at me, just the surface, swirling it like she might dissolve whatever she was feeling. "You're quiet," she said finally, voice low. "Everything okay?" I shrugged, fingers tapping the table. "Yeah, just thinking." She looked up, eyes sharp, scanning my face, waiting. I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd imagined her smile all week, that I'd replayed her laugh in my head 100 times, but the words jammed at the tip of my tongue. A boy from my friend's group came in, laughing loud. I froze. She tensed. She smiled politely, nodded, and excused herself for a moment. I watched her go, chest tightening with a strange mix of relief and longing. When she returned, she carried a small notebook. "Just planning some things," she said, almost too casually. Her hand brushed mine as she set it on the table. Not enough to touch the pulse, but close enough to remind me what I wanted. We talked quietly. Nothing important. Yet every pause, every glance, every half-smile was loaded. My fingers flexed under the table. I imagined leaning in. Imagine her lips, her breath, the small scent of lemon soap clinging to her hair. She reached over to adjust my sleeve, a brief, polite motion, and I felt it like a spark I wasn't ready for. She pulled back quickly, eyes downcast, and that was enough to make the world tilt sideways. I tried to speak. Words failed. She shook her head, and I couldn't tell if it was gentle, warning, or apology. I could only watch, trapped in that suspended moment. Then the cafe door jingled again. Another customer. I exhaled without realizing it. She smiled politely, something careful creeping back into her movements. But for one fleeting second, before she stepped away to serve the new arrival, our eyes met. Close enough. Charged enough. I imagined leaning in, and maybe she would have two, maybe. And then she turned, and the moment dissolved, leaving me with the taste of coffee, the faint scent of her hair, and that quiet, aching pulse in my chest. I folded my hands in my lap, staring down at the table. Words could wait, or maybe they wouldn't. I didn't know if I'd see her tonight, or if the spark had just flickered and gone. I found her on the park bench across from the little pond, late afternoon, when the sun was low and soft. She had her scarf loosely draped, shoulders curled slightly, as if carrying invisible weight. The benches were empty, the air filled with the faint smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. "Hey," I said, sitting a careful distance away. My fingers traced the edge of the bench. Too far, too close. She glanced at me, eyes narrowing, then softened. "Hey." We sat in silence for a while. The ducks paddled slowly, making ripples that reflected gold across the water. My mind twisted in quiet loops. Did I want to tell her? Should I? Would it ruin everything? "I saw him today," she said finally, voice just above a whisper. She didn't look at me. "Who?" I asked, though I had an idea. Her hand flexed around the strap of her bag. "Your friend. He asked about you. About us." Something sharp lodged in my chest. Us. The word wasn't hers, not really, but the thought lingered like smoke. I wanted to speak, but the sound caught somewhere between my lungs and the bench. I shifted, and her gaze flicked to the pond, back to her hands, twisting the scarf idly. I don't know. It made me realize I can't pretend. My stomach dropped. I had imagined this moment dozens of times, small, quiet, vulnerable, but not the weight behind it. Not the tremor in her voice that made me think she was standing on the edge of something she shouldn't. I reached out, fingers hovering near hers. Not enough to touch, not yet. She noticed. She didn't pull away, either. I started, my voice low, faltering. "I keep thinking about you. About this." I let it trail off, letting the words dangle between us, unfinished. Her lips parted slightly, a breath that seemed like confession, apology, and warning all at once. "Carter." I shouldn't. I swallowed, feeling the tension coil tighter in my chest. "I know," I said softly, almost to myself, "but I can't not think." She looked away, eyes drawn to the pond again. A leaf drifted across the water. Her fingers fidgeted with the scarf. "It's wrong. She paused, voice breaking just enough to be real. "I'm afraid of feeling too much." I nodded. My own pulse felt like a quiet drum, relentless. "Me too," I admitted, barely above the wind brushing through the trees. We sat closer now, almost accidentally, our shoulders brushing. And in that brush, everything we hadn't said filled the space. The park was silent except for the water, the wind, the occasional bird. A small, perfect pause. I wanted to ask everything. To name the pull. To step closer. To finally cross the line I'd been imagining for weeks. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I let the silence hold us, let the moment linger like it was breathing. And I couldn't help but wonder, if I reach out, will she stay? Or will I finally break what's already so fragile? I didn't see her the next few days. The cafe felt different without her behind the counter, even though everything else was the same. The same hum of the espresso machine, the same smell of burnt sugar, the same thin sunlight slicing through the blinds. I waited. I paced. I let my hands curl around my coffee cup more tightly than usual. Every text I drafted, I deleted. Too much. Not enough. Wrong. When she finally appeared, she was different. Guarded. Tight in the shoulders. The warmth I'd been holding on to quietly replaced by something cautious. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey," she replied, eyes downcast, holding her bag in front of her like a shield. I wanted to ask, where have you been? Why did you disappear? But the words felt too heavy. I sat opposite her, fingers brushing the edge of the table, memorizing the distance she kept between us. I've had some things to figure out," she said finally, voice low, clipped. "Personal stuff. Family." I blinked. Family. The thought twisted in my chest. My mind spun. A son I'd barely met, an ex I didn't know about, a past I'd been oblivious to. She sipped her coffee, eyes glancing at the window, avoiding me completely. I imagined her telling someone else stories I wasn't part of, laughing at memories I didn't know existed. And the weight of not knowing, the sudden absence, made my chest hollow. I tried to speak. If you want to talk, I don't know if I should. She cut me off. Just a whisper, but sharp enough. I sat back. The quiet pressed against me, thicker than the walls of the cafe. Every instinct told me to reach across the table, to shake her gently and demand answers, but I didn't. I watched her fold a napkin slowly, deliberately. The next day, I went to the cafe again. She wasn't there. I left my coffee untouched. The day after, the same. My phone buzzed with messages from friends I barely answered. I drafted a text to her, paused, deleted it, stared at the blank screen. I imagined her across town, in her apartment, doing ordinary things that weren't meant for me to see. I imagined her laughing with her son, doing laundry, staring out the window, and my chest ached with that quiet pull, that unvoiced longing. Evenings became strange. I found myself stopping at the corner bench by the pond, tracing the edge with my fingers, expecting something that never came. A week passed. 2. The cafe bell rang. Strangers came and went, and still, her seat remained empty. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. And somewhere, deep down, I wondered if I was waiting for her, or just waiting for the version of us that had never truly existed. I found her at the cafe just before closing. The late light slanted across the counter, and the quiet hum of the espresso machine felt almost like a heartbeat. She was alone, folding receipts and stacking cups, shoulders curved, focused. I hesitated at the doorway, unsure if I had the courage to cross it. "Hey," I said finally. My voice sounded too loud in the empty space. She looked up, eyes tired, a faint line at the corners of her mouth. "Hey," she said softly. Nothing more. I stepped closer, fingers brushing the edge of the counter. I didn't know if I should speak or just leave. The risk of being wrong pressed against my ribs. I haven't been coming by," I started, words tripping over themselves. "And maybe I should have. I don't know, not shown up." She kept folding, quiet, letting the silence stretch. I imagined walking away, leaving her with all the unspoken things that had grown between us. My chest ached. "I've thought about you. A lot," I said, finally just above a whisper. "More than I probably should." Her hands paused on the papers. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away, a faint tremor in her lips. I could feel the tension coil between us, fragile, electric. "I didn't know if I should say anything," I added, voice faltering, "or if it was even okay." She exhaled slowly, setting the papers aside. For a moment, the cafe felt suspended, as though it was holding its breath with us. "Carter," she said softly. I wasn't sure either. About any of this." Her eyes found mine, steady now, unguarded. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. She reached out, and her fingers brushed mine, careful, deliberate. My pulse jumped, but the fear didn't go away. I was afraid of what it would mean, or what I'd risk, she admitted, voice low, almost lost in the hum of the machine. He nodded, fingers closing lightly over hers. "Me too, but I had to tell you anyway." We sat in that quiet, letting the world shrink to the space between our hands. Nothing needed to be said further. The tension had not vanished. It had simply shifted, settled into something we could finally bear. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not dramatic, not perfect, just real. A crack of warmth in the cautious armor she'd carried. I felt the weight in my chest ease slightly. "Okay," I said softly. Not like a declaration, not like a promise. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we were here together in that moment. She nodded. "Okay," she echoed. And that was enough. Not fireworks, not confessions shouted across rooms. Just a touch, a look, a soft okay that carried everything we'd been holding back. We didn't need more. The cafe lights dimmed. Outside, the street hummed quietly. But inside, for a few small, perfect minutes, it was 8:47 a.m. when I walked past the cafe again. The city smelled faintly of rain and asphalt, the kind of smell that always makes me feel awake and tired at the same time. She was already inside, wiping down tables, pulling the blinds to catch the soft morning light. I didn't knock. I didn't announce myself. I just stepped in, ordered black coffee, the way she always remembered, and slid into the corner seat by the window. She glanced up, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, and nodded. That nod carried everything. Recognition, warmth, a quiet rhythm we'd claimed without saying a word. The weeks after that had been gentle. Coffee shared across that same round table. Tea at her apartment when the evenings were too cold to stay outside. A bench by the pond became our shorthand. No declarations, just a quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence. I'd lean back, hands wrapped around the mug, watching her twist the scarf absent-mindedly, and it felt like home. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. Words weren't always necessary. One afternoon, she laughed at something I said, just the sound, and I realized I hadn't noticed how much I'd missed it until that moment. Her son would come home from school, and I'd see her in motion, juggling homework, snacks, and small scuffs on the floor, and it struck me how her life was full, complex, entirely hers. And still, she made space for me. Not because I demanded it, but because we had found a quiet way to exist together without grand gestures or apologies. One day, she made my coffee with a dash of cinnamon, the same way she had the first week I noticed her. I stirred it slowly, savoring the familiarity. My thumb brushed the edge of the cup, and I caught her eyes, small, soft, laughing with that same almost secret patience she always had. I thought about everything we'd been through, the pauses, the near misses, the moments left unsaid. Life wasn't perfect. There were mornings I'd sit alone while she handled errands. Nights when the apartment smelled of detergent and leftover takeout. But there was also a quiet warmth that threaded through routine, through habitual glances, through the soft ritual of coffee and tea and the occasional walk by the pond. Sometimes I catch myself thinking back to the bench, the cafe, the whispered pauses, the unsent messages that never left my phone. And I realize how much of us is in the little things. The black coffee at 8:47, the way her hair falls across her shoulder when she leans forward, the way silence stretches without strain. I don't know if anyone else would notice it or care, but I do. She lifts her mug to me across the table, and I smile back. No words, just acknowledgement. No declarations, no fireworks. Just the quiet certainty that we've found something real. And for me, that's everything.